Hi there, and thank you for joining us on the Overcomers Overcoming podcast. We feature those who are in the process of overcoming or have overcome any type of life encounter, life obstacle that at the time seemed to be almost insurmountable. With this podcast, we have three objectives in mind. Our first objective is we want you to know with a confident resolve you are not alone. We want to work with you. We want you to know there are others who are working with you, who want to help you through whatever you are encountering, and together we will get through whatever you're experiencing.
Our second objective is there are multiple options for any life encounter you are facing. We want to help you develop a resolve that there are various options and solutions to any life dilemma.
Our third objective is to help you with critical thinking skills. If you're encountering something that was possibly a decision you made sometime in the past, and if you had the opportunity for a life redo, you would make a different decision. We want to help you with those critical thinking skills that can help you make an informed decision and not encounter what you're going through at the moment. We are the Cooper Culture, a veteran-owned business. We work with business personnel and families to develop and sustain connected relationship cultures within their families and organizations. That type organization is one where people feel wanted, appreciated, and genuinely a part of that organization. I'm with my wife and business partner, Marty, who is helping me facilitate this podcast. Today we feature Michael Ostrolenk, who describes his journey of self-discovery and working with others through transpersonal counseling psychology. The transpersonal has to do with a mental transformation. He describes how he developed an autoimmune disease as a child and began having divergent learning styles. It's a very interesting progression of life and how he overcame and through resilience resulted in being the person he is, and he's helping others. Marty, what are some takeaways our listeners can gain from Michael?
First, I want to say, Ron, Michael has a personality that just draws you to him. He's a very fun-loving guy, but he shares with us that, like you said, grew up with a self-discovery attitude, always wanting to learn. And with that self-discovery attitude, he has built a coaching business, helping others to reach the life and relationships that they so yearn to have.
And it's a great opportunity to learn. We are not defined by our past, but we can become who we want to be. Let's listen and learn together. Mike, it's great to have you with us. Our listeners are going to be very interested in learning a little bit of your background, which I understand starting at about age 9 or so, you started on a life journey of learning who you are. I'm going to call it my own terms, a mental transformation. You may have at an earlier life questioned who you are, what your purpose in life is, what your value is, any number of those things. I'm not trying to suppose anything, but just based on some of the background that I've read, I can tell you that some of our listeners are masking themselves, meaning they're going through life not knowing exactly what their worth is. I like to, and I have written on the subject of words matter. Sometimes the words we speak can have a very negative context to us. We absorb those words, and even though the words weren't necessarily meant the way they were taken, we sometimes just take those words in, live those words, and we don't understand who we are, what we're about, what our worth is. Michael, it's great to have you with us. Our listeners are going to be very interested in your life experience, but more so, what are you doing right now? Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys. Thank you for having me on. I 100% agree with what you just said in terms of our self-conversations. Our body believes everything we think. And unfortunately, I'm trained as a marriage and family therapist, so I do a lot of work with couples, but I also do a lot of work with individuals as a resilience coach. And I see both how people talk to themselves and self-limit because of the self conversations. And I also see how people engage with one another in terms of a couple or a married couple, and how the conversations don't go so well because of the language being used. It's negative, it's depreciating, it's contracting, and it's fascinating because when you work with individuals, you start changing how they think, which means how they talk to themselves. They start realizing that they're, as we would say at SEALFIT, 20x, you're 20 times more capable of whatever you want to do in your life than you think you can. And we have these self-limiting beliefs, which is a self-conversation, and then our culture and people in our environment, unfortunately, contribute to that self-negative belief system. So 100% agree with you in terms of like, we got to be more mindful of how we talk to ourselves and how we talk to our children and how we talk to our spouses.
I'm very intrigued with the term resilience. Talk to us a little bit about that, Mike. Is that a matter of I am resilient and everything just bounces off of me, or do I know how to handle the stuff that's said? In what context is resilience?
I love that question. So a friend of mine, a colleague, J.C. Glick, former Army Ranger, and I launched what we call Resilience 2.0. It's a men's group. And it's helpful for this conversation to make a distinction between what we call 1.0 and 2.0, or 2.0, 1.0, 2.0. Let me use the proper words. So what we would look at 1.0 in terms of resilience as something like a David Goggins who gets up and runs 100 miles before breakfast, or Jocko Willink, both Navy SEALs, who like takes pictures of his phone at 4:30 in the morning. He's out there working out really hard. All that's great. Like, physical capacity building is really important for men. They need to be strong and very capable. Yes. We say 2.0 is like that, and the and is three different things. One is, are men capable of sitting in their own experience, their own discomfort, their own feelings, their own thoughts? A lot of us, we have escape mechanisms. We don't feel comfortable with what's going on inside of our own system. So we go to porn, alcohol, drugs, we work extra, we train harder. Like, we distract ourselves with things in the environment because we don't like what's going on inside ourselves. So what we teach our men, and that's just one of three areas, we teach our men to learn to sit in their own stuff and build the inner capability, the inner resources, which is so important, because if you're always seeking distraction, whatever's going on inside of yourself is going to show up one way or another. It's either going to show up as possible psychological issues like anxiety or depression or whatever it is, or physical, like a lot of physical ailments are connected in some way or another to the lack of our ability to feel and express certain emotions. Like, we contract, we hold them in, and they show up as physical complaints. So just building the resilience in this human system for the individual man, it's important to just learn to sit with whatever the uncomfortable stuff is. I'll stop there to see if you have questions, because there's two other pieces of it.
And continue with this term resilience. Is it a matter of mental toughness? I'm probably using terms you would never use, but a mental toughness that you can say something negative to me and I'm just not going to believe that about myself. Is that a part of resilience?
Well, if you want to use that example, I would say it's this. If you want to use like someone speaking poorly of you, a very resilient person would be able to not be affected by that emotionally, but they might take it seriously as something to consider. So they're not going to be a wallflower and collapse because someone's being critical of them. They're not going to get overly aggressive because they're really centered in themselves. But if someone's critical of you, even if they do it really poorly, a really resilient person might go, "Oh, that's interesting. Let me think about what you're saying. Maybe your context is off. Maybe the way you're saying it's not great. It doesn't affect me, but I can learn something from it." So a resilient person is both strong and not moved by outside forces, but also open to feedback. And if they are affected by outside forces, other people, and it affects them in their system, a resilient person will more easily find themselves recentered, and then recognize, like, there's something going on inside of me as a result of what that person said. I need to deal with this. I need to address this. So it's not like they're completely stoic 100% of the time, because we're social beings and we are affected by other people. But like I said, the ideal is like, how can I refine my center, re-regulate myself, find out why I'm so moved or triggered by this other person, and what can I learn about what they're saying to me? That's
I'm
I can see
process.
some.
No, I'm processing what you're saying, Mike, as I can process what you're saying logically, deductively, inductively through logic, not emotion. But I'm confident enough in how I process information that I'm not going to react to it emotionally. Am I being too elementary, or am I off track with
No,
this?
I would say that's like 90% correct. The only 10% might be, we're human beings and we still might be emotionally moved by what they say. And I would say the more resilient person would be like, oh my God, that person said whatever they said. It activates something inside of me. I get frustrated, I get angry, I get sad, whatever the feeling are. Cool. I'm going to recenter myself, calm myself down, regulate myself, recognize that there's something in me that needs to be looked at, but I'm not going to act from that. I'm not going to act from emotion. I'm going to be aware of my emotions. I'm going to feel them. I'm going to deal with them, but I'm not going to be reactive and act from my emotions.
Yes, and I'm not trying to suggest at all we don't have heart or compassion. It's just
Yeah.
that, okay, we're going to process this logically. And I frequently use the term, I'm not going to enter the keyboard warrior kind of thing, that I'm going to, start hammering out a bunch of negatives about you because, you just attacked me and so forth. Mike, I'm very interested. Thinking back to when you were approximately 9 years old or so, what
Yeah.
was it that started this mental transformation, if I'm going to use that term?
No, I appreciate that question. So when I was 5, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder and I was in the hospital for about a month. And this is 1979, and it didn't have this kind of clinical support that they have today when children go into hospitals. So you can imagine a child in the hospital with all the interventions they're doing for me. It just caused a lot of dysregulation in my nervous system and my psyche. On top of that, I was eventually diagnosed with some learning disabilities. So school, I love learning. The school is challenging because I'd be really smart and then really quote unquote dumb. And at first the teachers would be like, "Oh, you're lazy." Like, I'm not lazy. There's something I just can't grok with this stuff here, but I can grok this stuff here. And eventually I was tested and diagnosed, and they stopped calling me lazy. They recognized I had an issue of how I process some information. So both those things, like my engagement with both those institutions, medicine was problematic and school was problematic, and just left the bad taste in my mouth and some psychic problems. And it's funny because I found this, well, my mom, I didn't find anyone, an amazing therapist who I'll speak to what she taught me. But prior to seeing a therapist, my mom took me to a psychiatrist. And consider this is 1979. Most psychiatrists, actually probably all of them back then, would just give, diagnose you, assess you, give you a medication. A lot of them still do that today. But so I sat with him and my mom, and we did the whole hour session. And I turned to my mom when we were finished, and I said, "He's fat," because he was fat. He smokes. He smoked. He can't help himself. How's he going to help me? And I walked out. And that's pretty obnoxious for a 9-year-old, but that's how I felt. And fortunately, my mom agreed. I mean, she wasn't pejorative to him, but she's like, if you don't feel comfortable with him, then he's not going to be able to help you. So she found Mrs. Pat Lawson. It was a psychotherapist, not a psychiatrist. And Miss Lawson taught me guided meditation, guided imagery, meditation, guided imagery, biofeedback. I was playing around with biofeedback in 1979. She got me to the martial arts. So she helped create a path for me forward of deep exploration, self-mastery, self-inquiry, those kind of things, the things you just mentioned. And that was around 1979 when I was around 9 years old.
I'm only curious, were you diagnosed autistic, anything of that nature? Or, okay, when you mentioned some people thought you had a learning disability, I'm curious to know if you were bullied and that kind of thing, and but you came through all that.
Actually, I was bullied, interestingly enough, but I was not autistic. And my learning disability was a processing problem, as an auditory processing problem. So like I'm a visual, I give you a prime example if you'd like.
Yes.
And this is kind of telling of like my interactions with institutions, which I've had a problem with lots of institutions. But do you remember in 10th grade, you had to do geometry, you had to do proofs. Do you remember proofs?
Certainly.
Okay. So for some reason, I don't know how. I could do them in my head. I could, like, literally, the teacher give me the thing and I could tell her the answer, but I couldn't write it out. Like, I did not know how to write out the proof. And at first you say you're cheating, look at your neighbors. I'm like, I'm not cheating. Here, I'm not cheating. Here's the answer. And she's like, you need to learn how to do it the right way. So I actually got sent to a tutor to learn how to do the proofs, which is interesting because, I would look at it retrospectively as two different things. Wow, isn't it cool that this kid can do it in his head? Maybe that's something to look at, as opposed to like, oh, he's cheating, and or like, oh, we need to have him do it the right way. Like, I get, like, yeah, Corey, you have to do it the right way, but like, there's no acknowledgement or excitement around the fact that I can just do this stuff in my head. So it's just one, and I can give you like a million examples. One of many examples of me running into the education institution going, you guys make no sense. Like, it's not one size fits all. You guys are, I mean, I was a kid, so I probably didn't use the kind of language I'm about to use now. It was like, you guys are stupid. Like, this one size fits all, like, approach to life just, it really doesn't work. It makes no sense to me. And I can give you like other examples of my interactions with school, where I'm like, the same thing. Like, you guys make no sense to me. Like, the way you do things is counter to me learning and getting a good education. Fortunately, I love to learn. So like, I would read on my own, but I never really liked school too much. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. And I'm going to guess you didn't like school because the teacher did not adapt to your learning style, that going to another classroom, proverbially down the hall, you may do very well with that teacher because that person is, let's say, either caters to or at least adapts to your learning style. Is that pretty much what it is, Mike?
I think you nailed it 100%. I can give you one more story, if you like, which actually fits into that narrative
Please
really
do.
well. So, I got diagnosed, learning disability. I got put into a program, and I would go to the class. It's called a resource class, once a day every day for the week for the year. And I spent all my time actually in the principal's office because I refused to do the work. And I never acted out. I wasn't a bad kid, so I wasn't like screaming and yelling. I just refused to do the work. So they sent me to the principal's office, and the principal would get pissed at me and yell at me. My explanation was, and this fits what you just asked, is like, the class, they're having me do everything. They're having me do the same assignments as everyone else. My learning disability is different than everyone else. So it's not that you're helping me. You're just putting me into a room to keep me pacified for an hour. And that's a waste of my time. So I refused to do the work. I get sent to the principal. Like, this happened for months and months and months and months. And eventually my dad went in there and just read her the riot act and pulled me out of the program. I eventually got back into the program in high school, and that program actually worked for me. But it's just another example of me running into an institution where it's like, you make no sense to me. Like, you're not really, like, if I really have this problem, help me with my problem. Don't put me in a class with everyone else that does the same stuff. That just didn't make sense to me as a, I guess I was fourth or fourth grade. I don't know exactly what I was thinking at the time, but I knew enough to say, no, I can't do this. Or I won't do this. I could, but I chose not to.
And so I'm processing what you're saying, Mike, is that, again, if you don't have a learning disability, I quite honestly, I hate that term, because some people take the word disability that, well, I can't. And with you, clearly you can. You're very articulate, you're very learned, but you may have had to go to different teachers, different places who can adapt to your auditory learning style. Is that somewhat accurate?
It's actually interesting because when I was in college, I did summer school, and I had the best time. When I was in college, I'd really connect with my teachers because, it's a different kind of relationship. And I did summer school up in Massachusetts, and I had a Marxist teacher, and I'm completely not a Marxist, but we would have these amazing conversations after school, after class, and just kind of debating back and forth. And he was open, so it was a fun conversation. And at the end of the semester, summer semester, I was talking about this learning disability stuff. And he said exactly what you just said. Oh, you don't have a learning disability. There's some things you can learn to do that might improve your capabilities in some of these areas. You weren't taught how to do them. It's just it's two things. It's a lack of your knowledge on certain things because you weren't taught. And it's just not recognizing how you do things. That's why they put you in this category. And so like he agrees with you, and I didn't know what to do with that at the time. I was like, that's interesting. So I still carry the story, and it's a useful story to tell in terms of this narrative we're explaining, in terms of my interactions with the institutions. But I agree with you. Yeah, it's most likely just a different learning style that I have, and perhaps what he said is also true, that there's certain things I just could have learned to begin with, which would help me in this process.
As you are thinking back through life, and maybe most of the way through your life, were there some people who said, I see your ability, Mike, I believe in you, I'm willing to work with you, as opposed to, oh my gosh, you've got a learning disability, you're not going to fit. And so I think what I'm asking, Mike, were there just early on the proverbial 2 or 3 who believed in you, and man, you linked up with them, and you made quite well for yourself?
So that's a great question. I really appreciate that, because I think it's important for people who have children to recognize the importance of having mentors or other people in their lives that can play that role for them. So that's a brilliant question. For me, I would say, first of all, my parents, they supported me throughout this whole thing. Like, my mom and dad went to war for the most part, against school, especially. Like, I can give you more examples of, like, my mom would go to school and have to fight for me. So they were really good. My dad, as I mentioned, fought for me in elementary school about the principal's office stuff. So they were supportive of me. And I had some neighbors too, now that you mentioned it, which I haven't thought about in 40 some years, who saw, and I'm not using this to blow my own horn, but saw like my genius, because I remember sitting in my cul-de-sac talking to him, because I was giving him some ideas on some, you'll love this, former military. I was like, I have an idea for a weapon system. And I was like 12. And I laid it out to him. And so he gave me some really nice compliments of how I think about things. And I would say that he, among others, were ones who recognized my capabilities and supported me through these kind of conversations. And I was fortunate, because even growing up, we lived in Washington, D.C., and my parents would have a lot of friends and come over, like, for dinners, whatever, or parties. And a lot of them were military, law enforcement, like FBI, law enforcement, national intelligence community, those kind of things. So amazing, deep, fun, cool conversations of things that are always of interest to me. And I always got recognized, as even though I was a little kid, by them for my knowledge on the topic at hand. And that's always like life affirming. So I like to spend time with older people at the time, because they could recognize that I had some knowledge on certain things.
Was there a time, Mike, when you felt, and maybe even as a teenager, you just did not have a lot of friends? And I'm building up to a very specific purpose in asking you this question. But was there a point in your life, maybe as a teenager, you didn't feel like you had a lot of friends? That it was the older people that you most identified with?
It's a good question. I always had lots of friends, so that was never a problem. I think, I might preempt your question by saying, how I felt about myself, I might have questioned why they were my friend. Like, I didn't feel good about myself, at certain times in my life. I'm like, why would you be my friend? Those kind of things would cross my mind. But I was lucky. I had a wide variety of friends from different cliques. And I also, like I said, just, I love spending time with older people, because I love those kind of conversations. And I'll tell you a funny story just on that, in terms of, answering your question. I remember People's Drug. I don't know if it doesn't exist anymore. I don't know if you remember People's Drug, but I was there, and I was like 9 or probably about 10, 11 years old with my mom. And I was always in the book section of every place I'd go to. And I ran into a guy who was part of the Canadian American, there's a Ranger group, Canadian American, who were part of D-Day. And he's part of that group. I can't remember the name of the group, but for whatever reason, we just started talking. And I hit it off with him really well. And we started meeting afterwards, just because I'd love to learn more about military history and World War II. So I'd meet with him and talk to him. That's kind of typical of like my time in that time. Like, I was just fortunate to meet really interesting people and be able to talk to them. And my mom was supportive of that.
And the reason I'm asking you that question is there are some who don't believe in themselves. They don't have a lot of confidence. And there are some teenagers or the younger people that, well, if I don't understand you, if you're different, however you define different, you become an outcast. And so there can be a part of our life where I just don't identify real well with those of my age group, but I can identify with those 20 years older than me. And it is a matter, and I'm describing a part of my early life, when you are with others who believe in you, even, and I use the term frequently, even if they don't verbalize just that, I
Yeah.
believe in you, it's your interaction with them that you know they believe in you. Otherwise, they wouldn't bother to spend time with you. But that helps us, it helps me overcome a very low point in my life where I had no confidence. Quite honestly, as I look back on my early preteen years, my mental health was not good at all. But it was through the mentorship of four men and Marty,
Nice,
my
nice.
current wife, that
No.
I came through a very deep part of my life. And I was not suicidal or anything. It's just that I had a pretty low self-image.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that with me. It gives me a sense of your interest and where some of your questions are coming from and how educational it can be for your listening audience to kind of who have similar type of things. It's interesting because I would say, and this is a great example. When I was in college, I was playing football, and some guy was videotaping. It was like some of them were like GDIs, goddamn independents, and there's frat boys and stuff. We're playing. And I was a freshman, and I remember one of the seniors going, "God, he's both critical of me and saying nice things about me at the same time about how confident I came across." And it was fascinating because I literally heard him say that, and I'm like going, "Holy S!" Like I don't like I might come across very confident, and I always put myself in situations. I never hold back to doing things. Like if I'm asked, I'll say yes, and then let's go do things. But I don't like I never felt the confidence. Like maybe my ability and what I did showed confidence, but like what was going on inside of me was not very confident. But I never let it stop me from doing things. And that was so interesting to get to hear him say that, because I'm like, wow, I come across so he wasn't saying arrogant, but like so confident. I'm like going, I don't feel confident. It's like, it took me quite a few years of doing inner work and inner therapy and stuff like that to, start where there's more of an alignment between what I'm capable of doing, what I do, and the internal sense of confidence. Yeah.
I identify with everything you're saying, Mike. I felt at an early age I wanted to be a leader. I felt I had confidence, but yet it was masked. It was deep in me. But I had processed some words that no, I'm not worth anything. I'm dumb. I'm stupid. But it was the four mentors and Marty that I was just telling you about that helped me through that very deep period. I am the kind of person, Mike, I would have never come to you. You would have had to come to me. That I was introverted enough at the time. I never would have exposed myself to tell you, Mike, my mental health is terrible, because I didn't know if you may institutionalize me and send me to some deep, dark place. I didn't know. So rather than risking that, it's better just to remain silent. I'm describing my early life, Mike.
Yeah, no, and I'm appreciative for you, or happy for you, that you have those four mentors, and obviously your lovely wife to support you and have you be able to feel the confidence that they saw in you, your capabilities and your skills and stuff. That's a beautiful thing.
So if you are amongst a person, let's say you know of a person who's much like me, that, okay, this person needs some sort of therapy, but they're not going to come out, and they're not forward enough, confident enough to come to you. Do you go to them and develop a friendship? How would you even get started?
You mean like if I would imagine them being a potential client of mine?
Let's say a potential client, or they are, and maybe you observe them to be what
Okay.
you
Okay.
used to be, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. No. Okay. Clarity. So if they're a friend of mine and I notice that inside of them, I would not approach them as a coach/therapist, because I there's some clear boundaries for me there. But I might recommend to them, if we get into a deep enough intimate conversation that they're beginning to share with me how they really feel versus how they show up in the world, that it might be beneficial for them to work with a professional. And I've been doing this for 30 years, so I can recommend someone to them. And if they're not interested in working with a professional, then I might be able to recommend, at least some things that they can start thinking about and practices they can start doing to course correct and get more alignment with like a innate sense of self-worth, confidence, and the capacities and skills in the outside environment. Make sure there's an alignment between the two. But I wouldn't intentionally go to a stranger to turn them into a friend and turn them into a client. I would not do that. But I would help a friend, like I said, make a referral out.
Mike, I want to ask, how did you get started into your therapy, or, what you're doing today?
Thank you for asking. So I was in the middle of an MBA program. I had a whole other career path. I had two paths. One was internal and private, like all this, inner work type stuff. I was always interested in this since I was a little kid. And then I had the other path, which is, a government path. That's how I was going to go down. And I was in the middle of an MBA program because I had spoken to one of our family friends who was inside the government. He recommended it. This is the 90s. MBAs were important back then. I don't think they're useful now necessarily as they were back then. Everyone should get an MBA. So he says, you got to go get a master's. You need to get an MBA. So I was getting an MBA and I was doing fine. I had a good grades and stuff. And a dear friend of mine I've known since kindergarten was murdered. And a month later, one of my teachers committed suicide. And it I had like the dark night of the soul. I'm like, holy moly, like life is so precious. And I just lost my dear friend. And what's this mean? And, so it kind of got me depressed and inward looking. And I realized like, I'm not really interested in the MBA. I have no interest in any of the business stuff. It's fine for other people, but like, this is not my thing. My thing is like the inner work. Like, how more psycho-spiritual, somatic type of work. And I'm like, that's what I really want to do. And that's only pieces of the MBA program that interest me, like the management styles and stuff. Like, but why don't I just focus in on what I really love? And I was like, okay, I will. And then I ended up moving from East Coast to the West Coast, doing my graduate work in transpersonal counseling psychology, getting licensed, doing postgraduate work in somatic or body psychology. So, unfortunately, I lost a dear friend and a teacher, but it did lead me on the path pretty much back to myself, really, and led me to this path of now spending the majority of my time doing the coaching and therapy type work. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. The transphysical, transmutation, a lot of the trans is what I think, Mike, is changing the way you think. And if I'm going off
let me just stop you there. Let me stop you there because I think it's really important for language clarity, because I think I know where you might be heading. Transpersonal has nothing to do with the trans movement. Two different things. Yes. Transpersonal means through and beyond the personal, the personality. It's a way of understanding how the personality structures are created, and that there's a beingness that sits behind these structures that we create to defend ourselves, to protect ourselves from real perceived threats in the environment. And that's what transpersonal psychology is. It's been around for decades and decades and decades. It has nothing to do with whether I'm a woman or a man, thinking I'm a man or a woman. That has nothing to do with it.
No, thank you. And I wasn't even thinking that, but the trans part, I think of that in the context of transformation, not transgender.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. And I want to make sure our listeners know that we are talking about transformation, and that part of trans, that we're moving from what used to be into the better life. And it is, I believe, a mental transformation. At least that's part of it. At least that it has been for me. I think more highly of myself now than what I used to, and hopefully that's not arrogance, but it's confidence, and hopefully it is a healthy confidence. But I know that there are some people who do not have a healthy confidence, and it can lead to some very fatal mistakes.
100% agree. And it's interesting because you said it's a mental thing, and I agree. It's like how we think about ourselves is really important. But as a somatically or body-oriented therapist, is also how our body organizes itself in response to internal states and external experiences or external environmental factors. And what I mean by that is, like, if you happen to be around someone who's not very confident, it's not just how they think about themselves. You can actually see it in their physical structure. Like their breathing pattern might reflect for them a lack of confidence. Their physical structure, like they might maybe like everyone's different. There might be a little bit of a collapse and looking down because they're afraid to do the eye contact. So you can actually look at the physical structure of the person. And everyone's unique. So there's no like necessarily universals, but get a sense of like what their psychology is because it shows up in their physical body. And when I work with clients, I work with how they think. That's really important. But I also work with the body, like teaching them how to breathe, how to relax certain muscles that might be contracted or engage certain muscles that might be flaccid. So it's like, how do you engage the body and the breath? Body is part of the breath. The breath is part of the body. Is also just as important for me, the way I work with people, as how do you think about yourself and how do you talk to yourself and how do you talk to other people? All of that stuff to me is really important.
What you just said is utterly important. And here's where I'm coming from, Mike, that as we are aware, I would hope our listeners choose to engage with those who may be less aware than we are. You're describing some symptoms, the breathing. I know that as people look down at their shoe tops and they seem to be very despondent, any number of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm coming from the standpoint that I use the expression, I would rather apologize than have to eulogize, if that is the point. And apologize might mean, well, I'm sorry, I saw some symptoms and I just thought maybe, as opposed to dismissing what I'm seeing through awareness and then wishing, oh, I thought I could see it coming, but I didn't have the courage to engage that person. Mike, I'm saying all that to say that if based on this podcast, we become aware of those within our circle of influence and we think, well, I just think you can benefit from talking with Mike. How would that person contact you? Do you do therapy virtually, or how do you work that?
Thank you for saying that, and I'll answer your question, but also I love it because what I'm hearing you say is we can have impact on those around us. And
oh gosh,
I didn't
yes.
get a chance, and I didn't get a chance to unpack the Resilience Optimized Men's Group 3 pillars. The third one is like we have a responsibility, not just men, but women too, but I work with men in this case, to step up in our communities, whether it's our family or workspace, whatever community it happens to be, and be the exemplar and be the leader. And that means helping lift people up. So I love like just your whole perspective on it because we're in agreement. Now, if someone wants to work with me, I'm trained as a therapist, but I do coaching now, just so we're clear on that. So I don't take insurance anymore. They can go to my website, Michael D. Ostrolenk, OSTROLENK.com. And there's a way to contact me and we can have a conversation to see it's a good fit for you. And if you're interested in the men's group, it's resilienceoptimized.com. You can go to that, read about it. And then if you're interested in contacting us, we're more than happy to jump on a Zoom with you and have a conversation, see if it's a good fit.
I'm going to make all of this available through the narrative, Mike, that describes you so that people can contact you. I want to ask you if you might consider another episode. You mentioned almost in passing 3 pillars of resilience. I am totally intrigued. Would you be willing to come back for another episode to talk more about that?
Would love to.
Well, I'm telling you, Mike, we need to learn how to be resilient and develop our confidence and so forth. And I do believe that topic is going to resonate real well with our listening audience. I'm going to send you a link, Mike, and let's reschedule. Let's come back, talk about those 3 pillars, because I do believe there is a segment of our population who needs to hear exactly what you're saying. And some of us go through life just not having the confidence to reach out to others. We just need to be, I use the term frequently, we need to be an effective catalyst to help some people make the connection. And I believe, Mike, you've got the right approach to this. Thank you for being willing to come back.
Well, I appreciate the offer. First one to being here. I've enjoyed our conversation and I look forward to part 2 with you guys.
Sounds great. Mike, we will definitely be back with you, and I know our listening audience is going to be looking forward to further conversation, learning more about those 3 pillars of resilience.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
We appreciate having the opportunity to share our and our guests' life experiences with you.
The Cooper culture advances organizations to achieve and sustain high retention rates, connected communication, and trust through personality insights and principled leadership. You can contact us at our website, thecooperculture.com, and you can contact us directly at ron@thecooperculture.com or Marty, M-A-R-T-Y, at thecooperculture.com. We work with you to help assess aspects of your culture to advance the environment and people to their best performance. We do that through our staff of certified personal performance coaches, leadership trainers, keynote speakers, and DISC personality behavior experts. You can book a speaking engagement directly through our website by contacting us at ron@thecooperculture.com. We look forward to sharing our life experiences with you, some of which are profound, some of which are pretty funny. Some of those life experiences are ones we'll never do that again because we've been through stuff. We truly look forward to working with you, speaking with you, helping advance you in any way that we can.